I'd always dreamed of having a place like this. A quiet slice of the world to call my own. A place where the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the lapping of water against a shore. For 2 years, I'd poured every ounce of my energy, every spare dollar from my dwindling savings, into bringing this lake back from the dead. It was more than just land. It was my property, my sanctuary, my dream made real through sheer force of will. I had bled for this place, literally and figuratively. And then, one perfect Tuesday afternoon, as the sun warmed my face and the water shimmered, they showed up to burn it all down. The HOA president, a woman named Diane, marched down my private driveway holding a thick, self-important stack of papers. She planted her feet at the edge of the water, a self-appointed general surveying a battlefield, looked me right in the eye, and told me that the lake I had just finished restoring wasn't mine. This is the story of how I fought back. Let me take you back to the beginning, before all this madness started. Before I knew what an HOA was really capable of. 2 years and 3 months ago, I closed on a piece of land that nobody else wanted. Seriously, it had been on the market for over a year, a forgotten footnote in the real estate listings. It was 25 acres, mostly dense, untamed woods with a house that was barely standing. The roof had holes, the windows were shattered, and it had the permanent damp smell of decay. But the centerpiece, the thing that made my heart leap and my imagination catch fire, was the lake. Or what was supposed to be a lake. When I first saw it with the agent, it was a 5-acre mud pit, a stagnant, algae-choked swamp filled with decades of neglect. It was a wound on the landscape. Old tires, rusted-out washing machines, skeletal bed frames, and countless fallen trees protruded from its murky depths like forgotten bones. The water itself was the color of thick black coffee and smelled like rotten eggs mixed with gasoline. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Martha, tried her best to steer me away from it. She called it a significant reclamation project, which is real estate speak for a money-sucking nightmare. My friends thought I was nuts. "You bought a bog," one of them told me, laughing until he cried. "You're going to be fighting off swamp monsters." But I saw something else. I looked past the rot and the filth, and I saw what it could be. I saw the ghost of a beautiful lake, and I knew I had to bring it back to life. I wasn't going in blind. Before I even put in an offer, I spent weeks at the county assessor's office. I had the original plat maps from the county, dating back to the late 1970s. The parcel was clearly defined, a perfect rectangle, with the lake situated squarely inside my property lines. It had been sold off from a larger tract of land decades before the neighboring subdivision, Fairview Estates, was even a blueprint. My deed was ironclad. Title insurance was clear. I had a lawyer review everything twice. There was no ambiguity. I was the sole legal owner of a private, albeit disgusting, lake. The work was brutal, more so than I could ever put into words. The first 6 months were spent clearing out the garbage. I rented a long-arm excavator and spent weeks pulling out more twisted metal than a scrapyard could have. I unearthed 2 entire car chassis, a collection of 55-gallon drums that thankfully were empty, and what seemed like 1,000 glass bottles. I hired a local crew of 2 brothers, hard-working guys named Jake and Eli, to help me drag out hundreds of waterlogged logs. We worked from sunrise to sunset, covered in mud and sweat. We filled dumpster after dumpster with junk that people had been thoughtlessly tossing in there for half a century. The cost was staggering, far exceeding my initial budget. I burned through my savings, took out a personal loan, and lived on a diet of ramen and sheer determination. But every time we cleared a new section of the shore, I could feel the land breathing again. I could see a sliver of its true potential. Then came the dredging. The lake was dying because it was too shallow, choked with a thick layer of organic sediment that starved the water of oxygen. This was the point of no return. I had to get permits from the county and the state environmental department, and that was a mountain of paperwork all on its own. I had to submit water quality tests, soil samples from the lakebed, and a detailed multi-phase restoration plan. I learned more about limnology and aquatic ecosystems than I ever thought I would. I spent nights reading textbooks and scientific papers. I had to prove to the state that my plan wouldn't negatively impact the downstream watershed. I remember the day the dredging barge finally arrived. It was a vast, clanking, diesel-belching beast. For 2 solid months, it slowly moved back and forth across the water, its massive vacuum hose sucking up tons of the black, foul-smelling sludge from the bottom. The smell was overpowering, but to me it was the smell of healing. As the lake deepened, something magical started to happen. The water clarity improved almost overnight. Natural springs that had been blocked for years began to flow again, feeding the lake with fresh, cool water. I collaborated with a retired biologist from the local university to reintroduce native plant species along the shoreline, including pickerelweed, water lilies, and arrowheads, to provide oxygen and create a habitat for insects and small fish. We installed an aeration system, a series of diffusers on the lake bed connected to an onshore compressor that pumped millions of tiny air bubbles into the water, creating a gentle, constant circulation that kept the water healthy. The most significant single expense was rebuilding the dilapidated spillway, a critical piece of infrastructure that controls the water level and prevents flooding. The original one was a crumbling mess of concrete and rebar from the 70s. A failure there could have caused severe erosion and flooding problems downstream, and I knew the liability was all on me. I spent over $50,000, which I didn't really have, to hire a structural engineer to design and oversee the construction of a new, modern labyrinth spillway that was both safe and effective. It was an immense responsibility, but it was my responsibility. After a year and a half of nonstop, back-breaking work, the transformation was just breathtaking. The water was clear and blue, so clear I could see the bottom 10 feet down. Dragonflies with iridescent wings zipped across the surface. I saw fish jumping for the first time, bass and bluegill that had found their way in from the feeder creek. I built a small, simple dock from reclaimed cedar, a place where I could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset, paint the water in shades of orange and purple. I even built a little gazebo on a point overlooking the widest part of the lake. It was perfect. It was more than a restored lake. It was a resurrected ecosystem. And it was all mine. I had the deed, the permits, and the scars on my hands to prove it. The day it all started was a Tuesday. I remember the weather was perfect. One of those early autumn days where the air is crisp, but the sun is warm. I was on the dock, staining the last few boards, feeling this profound sense of peace and accomplishment. The hard part was over. Finally, I could enjoy it. That's when I saw the procession coming down my long gravel driveway. There were 4 of them. Leading the charge was a woman I'd never met, but her reputation preceded her. A neighbor had once warned me about her in hushed tones at the local hardware store. Diane Mercer, president of the Fairview Estates Homeowners Association. She was in her late 50s, dressed in a sharp white blazer that looked absurdly out of place in the rustic setting, with a severe haircut that was precisely styled. She walked with a purpose that bordered on aggression, holding a clipboard as if it were a scepter of power. Flanking her were 2 large men who looked like they were cast as background thugs in a cheap movie, and a younger woman who was nervously clutching a binder to her chest. I stood up, wiping my stain-covered hands on a rag, a feeling of deep unease creeping over me. My property was clearly marked with multiple no trespassing signs. This was not a casual stroll or a friendly neighborly visit. "Can I help you?" I called out as they approached the edge of the lawn that met the lake, my voice friendlier than I felt. Diane didn't stop until she was standing right at the water's edge, about 20 feet from my dock. She ignored my question completely. Her eyes scanned the entire scene, the clear water, my newly built dock, the gazebo on the point, with a look of stern disapproval, as if I had personally offended her. "This is quite an extensive series of unauthorized modifications," she announced, her voice carrying across the water, sharp and imperious. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I walked off the dock and met them on the grass. My peaceful afternoon was officially over. "I'm sorry, who are you?" I asked, keeping my tone level. She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and appraising, giving me a quick once-over that made me feel like I was a bug. "I am Diane Mercer, president of the Fairview HOA, and this," she said, sweeping her arm dramatically across the scene, indicating the lake that I had poured my soul into, "is community property. You have been illegally altering a common area. I actually laughed. A short, sharp burst of disbelief. I thought it had to be some bizarre, elaborate joke. You must be mistaken. This is my property. I have the deed. I have the survey. My land is not and never has been part of your HOA. The woman with the binder, whose name I would learn was Sandra, nervously opened it. Diane pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a page. According to the HOA governing documents and the community plat map, Fairview Lake is a central amenity for the enjoyment of all our residents. You have been sent numerous notices regarding your violations. Wait, Fairview Lake? I asked, the confusion mounting. This isn't Fairview Lake. The county records don't list a name. It's just a lake on my land. We are rebranding it as part of our community enhancement initiative, Diane said, as if that was the most reasonable explanation in the world. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. You were sent the welcome packet. I was starting to get angry now. The condescension was dripping from her every word. I'm not part of your community. I don't pay HOA dues. I don't have to follow your rules. I don't answer to your board. You are trespassing. I need you to leave my property now. Diane's smile was thin and condescending, the kind someone gives a child having a tantrum. I'm afraid you don't understand how this works. Our bylaws give us jurisdiction over all properties within the development's original master plan. The lake was always intended to be a community asset. The fact that the previous owner neglected it and you purchased the parcel it sits on is a legal technicality we are in the process of rectifying. She slid a piece of paper off her clipboard and held it out. It was a formal-looking document with the Fairview HOA letterhead, titled Notice of Uncured Violation and Pending Assessment of Fines. It listed my dock, the gazebo, and even the life-giving aeration system as unapproved structures and alterations. It claimed I owed them $5,000 in initial fines, and that a daily penalty of $100 would accrue until I restored the common area to its original, natural state. They wanted me to destroy everything I had built. They wanted me to turn my beautiful living lake back into the swamp it had been. It was so monstrously absurd I could barely process it. This is insane, I said, shaking my head. This is my land. Look at the county records. The survey is crystal clear. This parcel was sectioned off and sold in 1978. Your development wasn't founded until 1992. One of the men, a burly guy named Tom, who was the HOA's compliance officer, stepped forward menacingly. We have our own maps, he grunted, as if that settled it. Your maps don't supersede a legally recorded deed and a county-certified survey, I shot back, my voice rising. Diane sighed, a theatrical display of her patience wearing thin. Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The hard way involves lawyers, liens on your property, and a great deal of unpleasantness for you. The easiest way is to acknowledge that the lake is a community resource and apply to have your small projects reviewed by the architectural committee. You begin paying your dues like every other resident. She actually believed it. The arrogance was breathtaking. They had printed their own maps and written their own rules, and in their minds, that made it a reality. They were acting as if their HOA bylaws were federal law. Let me be clear, I said, my voice low and steady now, fueled by a cold rage. You are on my property without permission. Your claims are baseless and frankly delusional. If you don't leave right now, I will call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing. For the first time, a flicker of something other than smug certainty crossed Diane's face. It was an annoyance. Pure, unadulterated rage. She was used to people cowering when she brandished her clipboard. She wasn't used to being challenged. Fine, she snapped, snatching the violation notice back from my hand. Have it your way. You'll be hearing from our attorney. She turned on her heel and marched back up the driveway, her entourage scurrying behind her like pilot fish. As she got into her oversized luxury SUV, she yelled one last thing out the window, a parting shot designed to instill fear. Do you have any idea about the liability you're carrying? When that new spillway of yours fails, the HOA will not be held responsible for the flooding. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle. The quiet of the lake returned, but the peace was gone. It had been shattered. They had come onto my land, my sanctuary, and tried to claim it, to steal the dream I had spent 2 years and a small fortune building. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the days that followed, I clung to the belief that it was all a ridiculous misunderstanding. A power-tripping HOA president who had gone too far and would be reined in by legal reality. Surely a simple letter from a lawyer explaining the black and white facts of my property deed would put an end to it. I was naive. I had severely underestimated the depths of their delusion and their appetite for conflict. I hired a local real estate attorney, Ben Carter. He was a sharp, no-nonsense guy in his late 40s. He reviewed my deed, the title report, the original county plat maps, and all the documentation from the sale. He actually chuckled as he read through them. "It's open and shut," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your property is clearly and legally distinct from the Fairview Estates subdivision. They have absolutely no jurisdiction. Their claim is so frivolous as to be laughable. We'll shut this down right now." Ben drafted a firm and professional cease and desist letter. It laid out the indisputable facts, cited the relevant state property laws, included copies of the key legal documents, and demanded that the HOA and its representatives stop trespassing and cease all harassment immediately. We sent it via certified mail, complete with a return receipt. I felt a profound sense of relief. This was how civilized people handled disputes. This would be the end of it. A week later, I got their response. It wasn't from their lawyer, which I found odd. It was a thick 9x12 envelope directly from the Fairview HOA. Inside was a professionally bound 90-page document, the Fairview Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or CC&Rs. Tucked inside the front cover was another violation notice, this time for $12,000, the original fine plus 7 days of accrued penalties. A yellow sticky note was attached with a message scrawled in Diane's aggressive, slanted handwriting. "Read Section 14B, we are moving forward." My hands were shaking with anger as I flipped to Section 14B. The section was titled Annexation of Adjacent Territories. It was filled with convoluted, self-important legalese. Still, the gist was their claim that the HOA board, with a majority vote, could incorporate and annex adjacent, undeveloped, or underutilized properties deemed vital to the community's welfare, aesthetic harmony, or recreational enhancement. They had apparently held a board meeting, decided that my lake was vital, and voted to absorb my land, essentially. They were trying to annex my land against my will like a tiny, suburban, colonial power. I was on the phone with Ben instantly. "Can they do this?" I asked, my voice strained. He was silent for a long moment as I read the section to him verbatim. "No, absolutely not," he finally said, a new, hard edge in his voice. "That's not how property law works in the United States. You can't just vote to take someone's land. That's wild. They might be able to annex land if the owner willingly petitions to join the HOA, but they can't force it upon you. This is a document of internal governance. It doesn't give them the power to seize private property. That clause is legally unenforceable garbage. The problem was that they believed it was enforceable, and they acted on that belief. The following Saturday, a landscaping truck with the Fairview HOA logo emblazoned on its side pulled up to the entrance of my driveway. 2 men got out and started planting a large, ornate sign in the soft ground next to my mailbox. It read, "Welcome to Fairview Lake, a private community amenity. No public access." I sprinted down the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you doing? This is private property. You can't put that here." The workers, looking barely out of their teens, just shrugged. "Just following orders, man. Diane told us to put the sign up. I told them in no uncertain terms to take it down and get off my land before I called the police." They looked at each other, then back at me, and seemed to decide I wasn't worth the trouble. They reluctantly pulled the sign out of the ground and drove off. But this was a clear escalation. They were now physically intruding. That afternoon, I went out and bought and installed a high-definition security camera at the end of my driveway. It felt surreal, as if I were fortifying my home against an invading army. Next, they started a propaganda campaign to turn the neighborhood against me. A newsletter went out to all Fairview residents. A sympathetic neighbor, a quiet man who was horrified by the HOA's actions, slipped a copy into my mailbox one evening. The front-page article painted me as a reclusive and uncooperative landowner who was hoarding, a vital community resource. It claimed my restoration project was unpermitted and environmentally hazardous, a blatant, slanderous lie since I had a folder thick with permits to prove otherwise. The letter ended by encouraging residents to report any concerning activity around the lake to the HOA's compliance hotline. Have you ever had a run-in with an HOA that's gone completely off the rails? Let me know in the comments. I felt like I was losing my mind. My quiet life was over. Cars would slow to a crawl as they drove past my house, the drivers staring. Some would park across the street and take pictures with their phones. One morning I found a bag of household trash dumped at the end of my driveway with a note taped to it. Community property needs community maintenance. Your turn. The pettiness was as infuriating as the larger legal threat. The final straw came a few weeks later. I received a certified letter from the County Code Enforcement Office. A formal, anonymous complaint had been filed against me for unauthorized construction of a dam, illegal dredging, and unmitigated environmental violations. The complaint, clearly orchestrated by the HOA, was a complete fabrication. However, I now had to deal with an official government investigation. An inspector, a weary-looking but fair man named Mr. Henderson, came out the following week. I walked him through everything from the very beginning. I laid out the 3-inch thick binder on my kitchen table. It contained every permit, every engineering report for the spillway, every water quality test, every receipt. I had documented everything, a meticulous habit that I now realize might save me. He spent 3 hours going over my documents page by page and then inspecting the property, from the spillway to the aeration pump to the new shoreline vegetation. At the end of his inspection, he shook his head in a kind of weary admiration. Your file on this project is more thorough than most professional developers I deal with, he said. Frankly, the work you've done here is exemplary. It serves as a model for ecological restoration. Whoever filed this complaint was maliciously wasting the county's time. He officially dismissed the complaint on the spot, but the experience solidified something in my mind. The HOA wasn't going to stop. They were willing to lie to government officials. Harassment and legal threats were their primary tools. It was time to stop playing defense. I needed to understand where their fraudulent confidence was coming from. I needed to find the source of the lie. My counteroffensive began in the one place where truth is stored in black and white and cannot be easily manipulated, the county records office. It's a drab, quiet building that smells of old paper and dust. For 3 solid days, I sat at a large wooden table, scrolling through microfilm, poring over microfiche, and carefully unrolling giant, heavy books of plat maps. I was looking for the origin story of Fairview Estates, and on the afternoon of the 3rd day, I found the smoking gun. It was a combination of 2 documents. The first was the original master plan for the subdivision, filed by the developers in 1991. I had the clerk help me spread the huge linen map out on the table, my heart pounding. And there it was. A thick blue line outlined the boundaries of the entire development. My 25 acres, including the lake, were clearly, unambiguously outside that blue line, labeled simply as adjacent private parcel. The developers, the county, and everyone involved were aware from the outset that my land was not part of their project. So where did Diane's map come from? The second document provided the answer, the minutes from an HOA board meeting held in April 2008. Diane had just become president. I scanned through boring items about lawn maintenance violations and holiday decoration policies until one entry made my breath catch in my throat. Item 7, community branding and amenity map. The minutes stated, Board President Diane Mercer presented a new, professionally designed community map for marketing and resident informational purposes. The map, which features the adjacent body of water under the name Fairview Lake as its central focus, is designed to enhance the perceived value and recreational appeal of the community. Motion to adopt the new map for all official HOA publications passed unanimously. They had just drawn it. In 2008, they hired a graphic designer and created a marketing map that featured my lake because it looked visually appealing. It had no legal standing whatsoever, but over the years, as new residents moved in and were handed that glossy, fictitious map, it had become their reality. They started to believe their own propaganda. This wasn't a historical mistake or a legal gray area. It was the deliberate creation and distribution of a false document for financial gain. This was fraud. The annual Fairview Estates HOA meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue for a public reckoning. I spent those 2 weeks preparing like a lawyer getting ready for a trial. I made large-scale, high-quality copies of the official 1991 master plat map, my property deed, and the 2008 meeting minutes. I even prepared a short, simple slideshow. My lawyer, Ben, thought I was being a bit theatrical. Still, he agreed it was the most effective way to dismantle their entire narrative in front of the very people whose money and trust they were abusing. The night of the meeting, the community hall was packed to capacity. The air was thick with that special kind of suburban tension. Diane was in her element, standing at the podium, radiating authority as she reviewed budgets and committee reports. Finally, she got to new business. As many of you are aware, she began, her tone grave, the board has been dealing with a sensitive issue regarding Fairview Lake. We have an individual who is, unfortunately, resisting the community's legal and documented right to this shared amenity. She pointed a dramatic finger at a large, glossy map on an easel beside her. Her fake map. As you can see from our official community map, that's not an official map, I said, standing up from my seat in the back. My voice was loud and clear, cutting through the stale air. A hush fell over the room. Over 100 heads turned to look at me. Diane's eyes narrowed into slits. Excuse me? This is a board meeting. You are a guest here, and you are out of order. I'm not a member of your HOA, so I can't be out of order, I said, walking steadily to the front of the room, carrying my roll of documents. And I'm not a guest. I'm the legal owner of the property you're discussing. You're showing them a marketing brochure. I want to show them the real map. Before she or her goons could stop me, I unrolled the official, county-stamped 1991 master plat map and used the magnets on the whiteboard to pin it right next to hers. The difference was stark and undeniable. On the legal document, there was a big space where my land was, clearly labeled adjacent private parcel. This, I announced to the room, my voice ringing with authority I didn't know I had, is the legal document that founded your entire community. It is filed with the county, and as you can plainly see, my land and my lake have never ever been a part of it. A murmur went through the crowd. People were getting up from their seats, craning their necks to get a closer look. Diane's face was turning a blotchy red. This is a trick! Our bylaws, Section 14B, give us the right to annex. They give you the right to annex with the owner's consent, I shot back, cutting her off. But you don't just have the wrong map. You have the wrong story, and I have the proof. I walked over to the laptop and projector. I put the 2008 meeting minutes on the screen, the relevant section highlighted in yellow. This is from your own records. This is the meeting where you, Diane, proposed creating a new community map for marketing purposes. You didn't discover a lost claim to the lake. You invented one. You voted to create a piece of fiction to enhance the perceived value of the community, and then you started treating it like fact. That's not just wrong, that's fraud! The room was buzzing now. I wasn't finished. I put up a slide with a picture of my 3-inch binder of permits. You told this community my work was unpermitted and dangerous. That is a lie. Here are the permits from the state and county. An official county inspector called my restoration work exemplary. Then, I posted the letter from the Code Enforcement Office, which officially dismissed the complaint against me as baseless and a waste of county resources. You didn't just lie to me, I said, turning to the audience of homeowners. You lied to all of them. You used their dues, your money, to harass a private citizen, to file frivolous complaints, and to pursue a fraudulent claim that has no basis in reality. You manufactured a crisis and you made me the villain, all to prop up a fantasy you created 13 years ago. Diane stood there, completely speechless. Her entire authority, which was built on a foundation of laminated maps and procedural bullying, had evaporated entirely in under 5 minutes. A man in the front row, whom I recognized as one of Diane's most ardent supporters, stood up. Is this true, Diane? Did you draw a new map and tell us it was real? All eyes in the room were on her. The walls were closing in. Her crony board members, Tom and the other man, were staring at the floor, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. The carefully constructed world of Diane Mercer, president for life, was crumbling around her. The meeting erupted into absolute chaos. Questions were being shouted at Diane from all corners of the room. People she had ruled over for years, people who had been cowed into silence by fines over the color of their mailboxes or the height of their grass, finally saw that the Empress had no clothes. Her two cronies on the board couldn't get away from her fast enough, stammering that they thought the map was legitimate and were just following Diane's lead. The board treasurer, Sandra, the woman who had nervously clutched the binder on my property, quietly slipped out a side door, abandoning her post. The next day, my lawyer, Ben, filed a formal, detailed complaint with the State Attorney General's office. This division oversees nonprofits and homeowners associations. We detailed the HOA's fraudulent claims, the harassment campaign, and the misuse of HOA funds to pursue a baseless legal fight. We included everything: the conflicting maps, the 2008 meeting minutes, the threatening letters, the dismissed code violation, and affidavits from me and the sympathetic neighbor who had given me the newsletter. Within a week, the Fairview HOA received a notice of official investigation from the state. Faced with a state inquiry and a full-blown rebellion from the residents, the board completely collapsed. The homeowners themselves called an emergency meeting. Diane and her two allies were forced to resign in disgrace. An interim board of concerned residents was appointed, and their first official act was to send me a formal written apology on behalf of the entire community. Their second act was to have their attorney draft and file a legally binding resolution with the county, stating that the Fairview Estates HOA held no claim, now or ever, to my property or the lake situated on it, and relinquishing any perceived rights under their fraudulent annexation clause. They also promptly reimbursed me for all of my legal fees. The Attorney General's investigation ultimately uncovered more than just the lake fraud. It turned out Diane had been running the HOA like her own personal fiefdom for years, finding evidence of financial mismanagement, improper fining practices, and other abuses of power. Her reign of terror was well and truly over. Life returned to a new, better normal. The neighborhood, suddenly free from Diane's oppressive rule, actually became friendlier. People would wave as they drove by, not with suspicion, but with a genuine smile. One Saturday, a family walking their dog stopped at the end of my driveway. The father called out, "What you did with that lake is just beautiful." "Thank you." The new HOA president, a reasonable woman named Maria, even called me a month later not to threaten me, but to sheepishly ask for my recommendation of a landscaper. The sign at the end of my driveway now reads, "Private property. The war is over." I spend most evenings now sitting on my dock. The lake is more beautiful than I ever imagined it could be. The turtles are back, sunning themselves on the very logs I almost removed. The peace I feel is more profound now because it's a peace I had to fight for. I didn't just restore a lake. I defended a dream. They tried to steal it with lies, intimidation, and a binder full of nonsense. Still, they forgot one simple, powerful thing. The truth, like water, eventually finds its way. And you can't build an empire on a fake map. This whole ordeal taught me that your property rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. You can have the deed, the law, and the truth on your side, but if you don't stand your ground, there will always be someone with a clipboard and a false sense of authority ready to take what's yours. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight for your slice of the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.